Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. So today we've got a lot of mods, and they're basically done by two people. So there's basically two people at the moment keeping the scene alive. Very cool to see how many mods we're getting, especially from these guys. So the two people that we've got modders that we got on today are NetRaptor and Hawkow1215, two of my favourite modders, or some of my favourite modders for this game. So I'm actually very excited to get stuck into this one. So we've got a whole bunch of mods coming, and a lot of them are some very cool animals too. So we're starting off with a Ceratopsian by NetRaptor. This is a Callosaurus. That's quite a pretty one. Big fan of this one. Have a look at... Oh, no, and of course it happens. Let's have a look at the orange one, because he looks quite well done there. I love the orange on him. How can you not love orange? Very beautiful animal, actually. Very well done. So this is a Clurosaurus. So this guy is a genus of Centrosaurine ceratopsid dinosaur and lived during the late Cretaceous period from what is now North America, between 77 and 74.8 million years ago. The first fossils of a Clurosaurus were collected in Montana in 1987 by a team led by Jack Horner, with more finds being found in 1989. So this animal's known from pretty good remains. In 1994, though, the species was described as a Challosaurus horneri, and it was described and named by Scott D. Hartman, with the generic name meaning a Clurus lizard, which is reference to the Greek deity Achelios, which was able to transform. He was a shapeshifter. And the specific name refers to Horner, Jack Horner, who's the famous, I would say infamous these days. He's had a few interesting comments and stuff like that. Stuff's happened with him. Well-known paleontologist. The genus is known from a few specimens consisting of skull material, mainly from skull material of juveniles and individuals ranging from juveniles to adults. So we have a pretty good idea of the growth theories as well. So I think that's quite interesting too. So these guys were quite a large species of Centrosaurine. These guys got to about 6 meters long and weighed about 3 tons. And as a Ceratopsian, very similar to other of the group, they walked on all fours with a short tail and a large head with a hooked beak. It also had a bony neck frill at the rear of its skull, and it had a pair of long spikes, as you can see on there, long spines that curved outwards. So if you have a look at this side, you can see they kind of curve outwards there. So you can find one in a better light to show you the better look. They're all looking that way. There we go. That looks a bit better to me. There we go. That one's probably a bit better. We'll come back to you because you're cool. Adult Achlorosaurus had rough bosses or rounded protuberances above the eyes and on the snout, while other Centrosaurians often had horns in the same position. These bosses were covered in a thick layer of keratin, but their exact shape in life is uncertain. Some researchers hypothesize that these bosses were used for fights, as well as display, butting into each other, but also for display. So within the Ceratopsia, these guys lie in the clade Pachyrostra, or thick snouts. It is suggested that it's believed to be a direct descendant of the similar genus Aneosaurus, which had spikes but no boss, like a very curved one, and a direct ancestor to Pachyrhinosaurus, which is a larger boss. The first two genera would be transitional forms, evolving through anagenesis from Styracosaurus. There has been debate on this theory, with later discoveries showing that Achlorosaurus is actually more closely related to Pachyrhinosaurus than originally thought, in the group Pachyrhinosaurini, which is quite interesting as well. So yeah, very cool animal. Not too much different known about it. As mentioned, it's known from quite a decent amount of materials from different ages and sizes, known from bone beds, which suggests it was quite social as well. And we talked about the anagenesis idea. You know, it's very I personally believe you can't really tell that from morphology. I think unless you have genetics to kind of help calibrate it, it's very hard to do that because convergent evolution is a thing. But yeah, very, very cool. As I mentioned, believed to be sister to Aniasaurus and the 3 species of Pachyrhinosaurus. But there's some cool things we know about this guy. We think it was social. We think that because it's been found in bone beds, and like other species of Ceratopsian, you know, like Centrosaurus and stuff. And these bosses, there's been a lot of noted that earlier studies, I think they were for displaying combat, which is very similar to like modern ungulates today. And there has been potentially concluded that these bosses were used for ramming, very similar to modern, caprines or goats. And there was thought to be potentially some more kind of pathologies. It's a disease, but it's more likely a normal trait. So it was potentially a pathology that was thought to be from headbutting, but then found out to be a normal autogenetic trait as it grew older. But I think that's still very cool. There's likely a lot of evidence they would have been pushing and shoving each other. I don't think that would be out of the range of possibility. But one other really cool thing we know is that these guys, they did studies on them to see if they were ectotherms or endotherms. So endotherms are animals like us, can produce their own body heat and keep themselves, at a stable body temperature, or ectotherms that rely on the environment to do that for them. So like basking and stuff, like lizards and crocodiles and stuff like that. And looking at the isotopes from these guys, which include a juvenile Achlorosaurus or Ionosaurus specimen. So we don't know it's either or, but still cool to know. And seems these guys were definitely homeothermic endotherms, so they were able to maintain the same body temperature. The metabolic rate was likely not as high as those modern mammals or birds, but it may have been intermediate. So even within mammals and birds, there is variation. For example, the kiwi has a body temperature a degree lower than other birds, and also animals like xenarthrans, so like sloths and anteaters, and other species like that, and monotremes have different body temperatures, again, or metabolic rates compared to other mammals. So it's not just flat. It's, there's variation within that. It's like a spectrum rather than a, whole thing. But yes, we mentioned they are from the Two Medicine Formation, which is quite famous. It has it's dated to the Late Campanian, the Late Cretaceous, about 83 to 74 million years ago. This time it was a wet, warm, semi-arid climate. Would have lived in a rain shadow as well, which would limit the rainfall. Rain would have mostly fallen during the summer, where the storms would have flooded the landscape, which makes sense considering how often a lot of these large ceratopsians like Centrosaurus and Achlorosaurus get preserved. Vegetation would be sparse and limited, and seems that they would have been doing around there. Most of the animals these guys would have lived with is Procerolophus, Scolosaurus, Hipparchosaurus, Aniasaurus, and Tyrannosaurus, very similar to Albertosaurus. The exact composition of the fauna is uncertain, but really very much relative to these animals like Lambeosaurus, Stegosaurus, Daspletosaurus and stuff like that. Potentially would have been there too. So a very interesting animal. And there has been some talk potentially about niche partitioning. With the skull of a Achlorosaurus was actually more than twice the size of a Neosaurus, and its bending strength and torsion resistance. So they may have been larger, because they are quite a bit bigger than Ionosaurus, especially larger skulls. So that would have been how they've been able to niche partition within the different ceratopsians in the same environment. So that's very, very cool. Love these guys. So we're going to let them run off and do their thing. We're going to have a look at another Netraptor mod. So let's have a look at the Campanian. Look at this guy. Isn't that cool? So you can get a good look at you. Turn around right quick. Let's see if we can get a good look at you. I want to get a look at the feet as well. Got you. I'll have a look at you. I think you look like the best positioned. All right, so this is Campanian. Very weird name. So these guys are a genus of Rebecca-saurid sauropod. They come from the late Cretaceous, about the Cenomanian, from the Cunderos Formation in Argentina. You might be familiar with that name. We'll get into that, why that might be familiar. The genus itself contains a single species, Campanian fragilissimus, which is from a fragmentary specimen. So the holotype itself was discovered in sediments in the Caladeros Formation, in the Barra Advesana de las Campas locality near Villa es Chocón, in the Neuquén province, Argentina. The specimens consist of an incomplete skeleton, including the brain case and right quadrate from the skull, a partial dorsal and sacral vertebrae, caudal vertebrae, piece of the ilia, and 2 ungual phalanges. And they were described in a scientific paper in 2016, but left unnamed. But in 2024, Lezo et al. Described the specimen as a new genus and species of Rebecca-saurid. The generic name Campananien comes from La Campas, which is the type locality, and the word Nien, which means air, because, being a sauropod, they have very hollow bones. And the specific name Fragilissimus means the most fragile in Latin, because it had a very notably thin ilium, which is very fun as well. Very interesting characteristics. So what's very interesting about these guys, they were a Rebecca-saurid, so a group of short-necked diplodocids. Very, very interesting. But they had a quadrate fossa where they're actually 30% larger than the Rebecca-saurids. So these guys may have, been more similar to Nigersaurus and Lemosaurus, even though they were more derived. They might have had that because they were doing a similar lifestyle. One thing as well is they may have had a potentially more kind of straight neck. And other Rebecca-saurids, the ilium even contained prenamic chambers, or hollow chambers in there. So these guys were very lightly built animals for sauropods, even though sauropods were still super heavy. Even this guy, still quite a large sauropod, still a very large animal. But these guys were really saving weight by having a lot of their skeleton be as light as they can make it, which is very interesting. So in their 2024 phylogeny, Lezo et al. Found it to be the sister taxon of Cytosaura within the Rebecca-sauridae, and a clade also containing Zapalosaurus. And the results are displayed in a diagram. There's also unnamed Rebecca-saurid that could have been placed on it, but not. So it is a lot more basal than Rebecca-saurini. It's related to things like Zalposaurus, Cytosauria, and more distantly to Amazonosaurus. And then you get the later animals like Nigersaurus and Rebecca-saurus and Lemosaurus as well. So it's also really cool because this is a more basal type of Rebecca-saurid, but it did live with a later one, as we'll get into. So the Cunderos Formation was a very interesting environment, a desert depositional environment with some oases and stuff like that, and it was kind of like these western remnants on Gondwana of this, these Middle Cretaceous ecosystems. So the particular locales it is known from is there's remains of another Rebecca-saurid species, a small unnamed Balisaurid, a chalid turtle, and a Sphenodontian, or a extinct relative of the Tuatara. Several animals are also known from its formation, though. These more Rebecca-saurid sauropods, such as Lemosaurus, Dosceptospondylus, and Raeorsasaurus, which are all Rebecca-saurids, more derived than this one. And there's also other titanosaurian sauropods like Endosaurus and an unnamed giant titanosaur from the Caldera Formation, which is likely within the same size range as Argentinosaurus. And also theropods such as Ashirati, Bicenturnia, Buetaraptor, Exocelosaurus, and Giganotosaurus. And the anamic, possibly thyreophorine Jacopel as well. There are other animals in the formation as well, such as Tika and Pyrosphenodon, which are types of rhynchocephalians, relatives of the modern Tuatara, the snake Najash, and multiple different species of crocodiliform, and then also the mammal Chronopio. So yeah, very interesting lot of animals, if I do say so myself. Yeah, very, very cool. Nice to see some sauropods, and some little sauropods too. Still massive animals, but still, a sauropod, nonetheless. We're going to keep keeping on. Next up, we've got Hawk Owl who's coming back. Hawk Owl has got here the Duonicus. He's doing a little bit of moonwalking. But a very cool little guy. Oh, and of course that happens. There you go. So this is Deinonychus. Deinonychus, which means two claws, not to be confused with Deinonychus. Deinonychus is an extinct genus of therizinosaur theropod, which comes from the late Cretaceous, the Cenomanian to early Cretaceous age of what is now Mongolia. It is known from a partial skeleton, including several vertebrae, most of the forelimb, and part of the pelvic girdle. It's also found in outcrops in the Barashi Formation. The remains itself were discovered in 2012 by the Mongolian Academy of Sciences and was briefly mentioned in later conference abstracts, but the genus itself is a single species, Deinonychus trissobarati, which was described in 2025, so just last year. Some very interesting animals from the last year. The hand of Deinonychus has only 2 fingers, similar to Tyrannosaurids, and compared to the 3 that are normally found on most theropods and also their relatives. This anatomical feature, in addition to its long claws, may have allowed Deinonychus to efficiently grab plant material to consume. The geological formation lived with other therizinosaurs such as Amygdosaurus, Erlikosaurus, and Signosaurus as well. It's a very cool animal. So the bones itself are believed to belong to an individual that actually is immature, with an estimate about 260 kilograms, similar to Onychosaurus, which is a little bit bigger at 278 kilograms, or about 600 pounds. And then you've got the other ones like Megasaurus and the Stegosaurus, which is about 600 kilograms and just over 1.4 ton, respectively, for those species. So it was quite packed with therizinosaurs. Although no estimates of body length were given in the academic description of the taxon in 2025, they noted that the animal would have been approximately about 3 meters long, or just under 10 feet long, which makes sense. Again, it's also an immature individual. Could have got a bit bigger than that. I wouldn't think it would have got much bigger, but, that seems about size. So the manus, or the hand of Deinonychus, is well preserved, and actually represents the first known complete keratinous claw among para-avian sauropods. I mean, theropods, not sauropods. But very, very cool. That's why we're going to have a look at these claws. So these claws are actually pretty accurate. So the structure is extremely reduced in the third metacarpal, as like a splint. Unlike that of other therizinosaurids, which have well-developed proximal distal ends, the absence of the third digit indicates that Deinonychus was didactyl, which is the first known example of this in therizinosaurids. So that's very cool with therizinosaurs. The manual ungles, or hand claws, were quite large and curved. However, one of the ungles actually preserves the keratinous sheath, so the sheath that goes over the claw. An expanded feature, but is often rarely fossilized. The measured curvature of the keratinous sheath was probably 100 degrees lower than the curvature of the claw, and indicating that the keratin increases overall length by more than 40%. So that shows how much actual clawing there is going on there. And that makes sense because what we find with other animals and, other preserved dinosaurs like Borealopelta, the keratin would probably be an extra half on top of the bone core. And that seems pretty consistent with that. Unlike other therizinosaurids, though, the elbow in the first digit of Deinonychus has actually got a limited range, and is more similar to those of Tyrannosaurus and the oviraptorid Oscosko, which is very interesting, which are both theropods with 2 fingers. The claw joints were actually able to flex near perpendicular to the preceding phalanx, which is a condition not known in other therizinosaurs or didactyl theropods. The strong flexion of the claw and the strong curvature of the keratinous claw would have helped Deinonychus during feeding and effectively grab and pull down vegetation into its mouth. Menace similar to some modern mammals like pandas and, sloths, I guess, and things like that, and gorillas. But yeah, very, very interesting animal. So it seems that this guy is actually a member of the Therizinosauridae, so are quite derived from the group. So these guys are more closely related to, Therizinosaurus itself, rather than the more basal ones like Amygdosaurus and Stegosaurus. Though this one's much more similar to Therizinosaurus itself compared to the other ones. Very, very cool. So much more derived. And the locality this guy's from is from about the Cenomanian, so about 95 to 89 million years ago, which is quite interesting. And it seemed to be environments like a semi-arid climate with large lakes and stuff, with the presence of wet mirandas and lakes. Large state crossification of many sandstone layers suggests there were quite large rivers and water bodies that are drained to the eastern part of the Gobi Desert. There's also been fruits described from there, and is quite rich in terms of dinosaurs, as you can imagine. Let's see if we can get a better look at you over here, because we're talking about you. That includes these other therizinosaurs I mentioned, but also Kakakalu, which was another recently described tyrannosaurid, Achillobeta, Granulomymus, also the Ankylosaurs Talarurus and Teganchenta, Graciloceratops and Entamacephalae, which are small macromargicephalians, then also Hadrosaurid Gorbyhadros and the sauropod Eketu, and also other species such as crocodilomorphs and turtles and stuff like that. So a very rich ecosystem. And yeah, very, very cool mod. Definitely a big fan of that one. So let's go off Hockow, do your own thing. That sits right there, of course he does. Alright, so next up, we have got, this one's a 2-species mod, so this is another one by Hockow1215. This is Saurolophus. We're having a look at the bigger species first, because it's probably the more impressive one, and then we'll talk about the holotype species as well. So we're going to get started with Saurolophus Angustor... You're going to get the name right. Saurolophus... Let's see, Saurolophus angustoroides, or angustorosus. I think that's how it is, angustorosus. And yes, you're going to be walking right in front of my hatchery, because of course you are. Let's do it now. Just say I'm very impressed with the colours on this one and the detail. Super impressive. You can get that one over there posing. There we go. I like this one. I'll have a look at you. So this is Saurolophus. So Saurolophus, which means lizard crest, is a genus of large hadrosaurid that lived during the late Cretaceous of North America and Asia, in what is now the Horseshoe Canyon for the American one, and the Namek Formation, respectively, from about 71 to 66 million years ago. And is one of the few dinosaur genera actually known from multiple continents. So the type species Osborni, which is a smaller one, we'll talk about that next, but this one is the larger species Augustorosus, which was represented by numerous specimens from Mongolia, and was described by Anatolia Konstantinovich Rotovlesky, so a very long name. And yeah, very, very cool animal. It's a lot more well known, so we get to know a little bit more about the species than the other one, but we'll still talk about that one, so we're going to start with this one. So this one was found in Namek, as I mentioned before, Asia. It was first described from Ischium from China. And much better remains were found in Mongolia and the Namek Formation. And there was some taxonomy going on around the place about where this one goes. But the two species model is pretty much is what we're all going with today. There had been some debate, but yes. So Saurolophus is known for material including nearly complete specimens, which gives it quite a clear picture of its anatomy. So this species, Augustorosus, is much larger. It's been estimated as long as 12 to 13 meters, or about 39 to 43 feet, and would have weighed potentially up to 11 tons. The largest known skull for this one is 1.12 meters, or about 4 feet long. However, there are actually some remains or footprints that suggest they could have got even bigger, even rivaling animals such as Shutungosaurus. Apart from the size, though, these species are actually quite different, quite identical, so very, very similar. So that may just be the American dwarf one, and this is the Asian large one. So very, very cool. Most distinguished feature of Saurolophus is the crest. It isn't actually present in young individuals as well, but it is smaller. One main difference between the two species is that these guys have a much more kind of crest that's a little bit on a lean. The Osborne has much more of a taller, straight crest sticking up. These guys are a little bit more laid back. It's long and spike-like and comes out at a 45-degree angle. And no one knows what they were really used for. We think they would have been potentially help with breathing or calls or respiratory function, which makes sense. But yeah, you'll see when we talk about Osborne, it's got much more taller one. This one's a lot shorter, which is very interesting. In terms of classification, it's believed to be within the Saurolophony, so its close relatives are Prosaurolophus and Cubanosaurus. It's quite interesting as well. Very similar to most other species or most other hadrosaurs. Large herbivore. These had dental batteries for chewing, and they would have done all that as well. And the crest function, they had been talking about it. They had been connected to a chameleon. It could be muscle attachments. Most evidence seems to suggest that these guys would have been. There's evidence suggested they may have been a snorkel, but they may have been used for sexual dimorphism, and also had inflatable skin. That's another one that's been worked on. But most likely, it would have been used to make different sounds and stuff, and used for sound communication as well, meaning resonators. What's really cool as well, this one's known from ontogeny, so we do have a pretty good idea of how they grew. So in 2015, they actually found a nest of several juveniles that were recovered from the notorious dragon tomb assemblage as well. And they also noted that even 3 or even 4 juveniles can be recognized, and 2 fragmentary eggshells are found in association. Juveniles within these blocks were identified as prenates, and a skull length of less than 5% of those of the adults, indicating they were the earliest development stage at the time of their death. Based on this, they actually indicated the ontogeny of Angustirosis. The distinct crest was found in adults was poorly developed in infancy, and then the kind of snout grew longer, the orbit more oval shape, and then the cortical process got higher. So we actually have a pretty good idea of how they grew, which is quite cool as well. What's also cool about their social behavior, we do have a Nemect large bone bed, which is monodominant, which has 1 species, and has 3 different size classes of Angustirosis. So there's at least 21 specimens of Saurolophus within this bone bed, and the team indicate the max bone bed's minimum size of about 200 meters squared, or 2,000 meters squared, which suggests that over 100 could have been preserved. However, it is discussed through evidence that clearly reflects a catastrophic mass mortality of a social group, and provides the first evidence of gregariousness in this taxon. The exact conditions and cause surrounding their death cannot be determined. Bell and team also notice while Dragon's Tomb provide direct evidence of social behavior, there is yet no evidence for Osborne. So potentially some differences. Even animals that are closely related, they have quite different social structures. Like even look at lions and tigers. Like from a skeleton, you can't tell a lion and tiger apart, but lions are very social and tigers are not. So it's very impressive actually. One other really cool thing as well, we do have a pathology. We have a left humerus of a nearly complete skeleton, which looks heavily damaged and has bite marks from a Tarbosaurus, which suggests the lack of damage at the rest of the skeleton, where likely this would have been scavenging an already dead specimen. It's unlikely that a large predator such as Tarbosaurus would have left sparse treating traces and had a entire carcass to feed on, so it might have just had that little bit while it was available, which is quite interesting as well. And daily activity, they've actually been comparing the scleral rings, or the rings around the eyes, of Saurolophus to modern birds, and they suggest they may have been carbothermal, which is very similar to most large herbivores. And this guy's known for the Nemect Formation. So the Nemect Formation, it was one of the largest herbivores in that ecosystem, and it lacked large ceratopsians, but there were large sauropods and a more diverse theropod fauna. So unlike other Mongolian, formations that have the Dijota, which includes, Protoceratops, Velociraptor, the Nemect seems to be well watered, and actually very similar to the Dinosaur Park Formation in America. Found in Alberta. When examined, the rocked faces of the Nemect Formation suggest there were streams and ridge channels, salt flats and lakes and stuff, which is very cool. And there was abundant plants and stuff to sustain large herbivores like Saurolophus. From what we see, it coexisted with the rare hadrosaurid Barasbaldia, Homocephaly and Prenocephaly, both pachycephalosaurs, the large Ankylosaurid Sarcania, the rare Titanosaur sauropods, Nemectosaurus, and also Viticultia, and also that big Titan one. the Mononicus, 3 different troodontids, including Zanzibar, and several ornithomimosaurans, including Rectia and Nemectomania, the ornithomimids, Asuramimus and Gallimimus, and 2 giant theropods, Dinocaris and Therizinosaurus, including the the Titanic Tyrannosaurus, Tarbosaurus. It would have been a rich habitat, lots of ginkgos, ferns, all that stuff. And it would have been an important herbivore in this ecosystem. So it's quite interesting as well. So these guys were doing quite well. And then we can compare to how they were doing with Osborne. So that's the big one there. I really love how he's done not just the details. So you can see some of the details here, these little differences, much larger size. Some of the other differences is the horn that comes a little bit more straighter. That as well, large size. And I really got to appreciate, all the keratin he's put on the beak. Most people really don't put enough keratin on that beak there. And they've got the proper feed on, so you see the proper hoof. So yeah, that's proper hadrosaur. Very, very happy with that. So that is Osborne. Oh no, this one's Augustarosus. This one is Osborne. So we'll have a look at him. This one you can see is a lot smaller. I'll have a look at you because I like how you posed. I like your pose. I like your cut, G. There we go. We'll actually just change it. There you go. So this is Osborne. So Osborne was the type. It's the type holotype, what the genus is based on. It is known from a skull and skeleton, also 2 other complete skull fragments. Not quite as well known as Augustarosus, but still very well known. It differs. This guy has a little bit of a shorter skull, and we mentioned doesn't have the distinctive row of rectangular scales along the midline. These are not being preserved in Osborne. And these guys also have different scales, which indicate they may have had different patterns. These guys had more radial scales, while Augustarosus had more kind of ventral, vertical scales, which is very interesting as well. So yeah, this guy was quite a bit smaller. Osborne is rarer, and a little Albertan one. It got about 8.2 to 8.5 meters long, or just under 30 feet, and it had a head about a meter long, and it would have been estimated about 3 tons. So probably about a third the size of Augustarosus, which is very interesting as well. We kind of talked about that as well. Not that much different taxonomy, but yeah, very, very. Most of what we know comes from Augustarosus. But yeah, this guy would have been found in the Horseshoe Canyon formation. And the upper part, this formation is quite famous for having a significant marine influence, because at this time, the Western Interior Seaway was dividing America in 3. It covered most of the midsection of North America. It may have preferred to stay inland, and it lived with other dinosaurs such as Apacrosaurus, Parkasaurus, Anodontosaurus, Spagatholus, Drosera-mimus, an unnamed species of Struthiomimus, Triceraptor, Albertonicus, and the Tyrannosaurid Albertosaurus. So this dinosaur from this formation was part of the Edmontonian land vertebrate age. And there was actually a 2001 study that actually suggested that Osborne was part of distinct inland fauna characterized between Archaeotriceratops ornatus and it, while the more coastal populations were things like Pachyrhinosaurus canadensis and Edmontosaurus regalis. However, the association between that is noted to be an error, as Echinoceratops is only found in the lower Horseshoe Canyon, and these guys are found in the upper. So these guys, that didn't turn out to be quite right. What's really cool as well, Augustarosus is common in the fossil record, and may have been quite a common animal and important animal in this ecosystem. Osborne was actually quite rare, and did face competition from other species of duckbills, as I mentioned, Montosaurus, Apacrosaurus, other large animals as well, and Parkasaurus. Those would have been the main sort of competitors for this guy. So maybe a little bit smaller to compete. Maybe lived in more forested or more upland to avoid competing with the larger things like Edmontosaurus. Yeah, very, very cool. I'm very happy with how this guy's come out. Really, I really like Hockow's way of depicting different species. I'm actually very proud of that. So very, very cool. All right, we're going to move on. Don't worry, Hawkow's not finished just yet. We've still got some more going on. Now we're moving on from dinosaurs. We're moving to some amphibians, which I'm very excited to talk about. We have got Eriops. A very goofy little goober, if I do say so myself. Let's see if we can get a nice one sitting in the sun. I like this one. He reminds me of the This one reminds me of the Beelzebufo from Prehistoric Planet. So let's have a look at you, Eriops. Very, very cool. Well, that's what this. He looks cute. We'll have a look at you. I actually quite like the pose of you. You look the best. Goofy goober he is, or she is. Keep forgetting all the dynamos in the game are supposed to be females, at least in this one. Eriops, which means drawn face. It gets its name because most of the skull was in front of the eyes. Is a genus of extinct amphibious tender-spondyle amphibian, and that contains the type species Eriops megacephalus, which basically means the big head. Its fossils are found mainly from early Permian deposits in the Texas red beds. There's also Eriops grandis from New Mexico. Fossils of it has been found in... so there's megacephalus. I think the other one would have been lumped, potentially. Anyway, so these guys, fossils have been found from the late Carboniferous rocks of New Mexico to early Permian deposits in Oklahoma, Utah, the Pittsburgh Tri-State region, and Prince Edward Island. So it is quite well known. Eriops average a little over 1.5 to 2 meters long, so about 4 foot, 5 to 7 feet long, kind of around there. But it potentially could have grown up to 3 meters, which made it among the largest living animals at the time. Adults were estimated between 102 to 222 kilograms, or between 225 to 489 pounds. And the skull was large and relatively broad in coeval tender spondylus, and the skull reached length about 45 centimeters, or about 18 inches. The postcranial skeleton of Eriops was among the most completely known of all tender spondylus, and the configuration of the postcrania is similar to other tender spondylus, but the relative degree of ossification, or hardening and bone, and overall size of the animal produced some of the sturdiest and most robust postcrania among the Paleozoic tender spondylus. And actually, the texture of Eriops skin has been revealed in a fossil mummy that was described in 1941. The mummy suggested it had a pattern, as the body and life was covered in a pattern of oval bumps. So you can actually see that represented there. So you can see the bumps. Bumps. You can actually see that, which is really fun. Discovery and species. There's thought to be 2 presently valid species. Megacephalus, the type species, is the large-headed aspect of the genus. This remains are found from the early Permian. They search a median age about 295 million years ago from southwestern US. Most of these specimens, including the type material, have little to no locality information other than that from the early Permian of Texas. But most definitely placed specimens are recorded in the Churchelon and the Pulmonana Pala beds and Clyde formations. The second nominal subspecies is grandis, which is described from the Cutter Formation of New Mexico, but also from Colorado. There were lots of other taxa that was actually previously placed in this genus, but have now been split into their own ones. So there, one species, Eriops vivoni from the Carboniferous, is actually now its own genus, Glyptoteron. Also, there's also Pachyrhinus, Pachyoxus, and many other things that are now considered either. There's been a lot of taxonomic revision within Eriops, and those 2 species only remain valid. All of them have been split into their own genera, or been considered nobidubians, or lumped into the 2 species. So that's there's material only tentatively referred to as megacephalus found from Kansas, New Mexico, Utah, Oklahoma, and Prince Edward Island. The primary material of Eriops has been reported from the Common Group of West Virginia that has also been redivided as Glyptoteron, and unpublished specimens are referred to as Eriopspa, which has been listed in the region. So Eriops is actually one of the largest non-andiope tetrapods of the early Permian. Among tender spondylus, it's rivaled only by the Adipoids, which are relatively rare. which was another really weird group of animals. The ecology of Eriops has been extensively debated and remains without consensus due to conflicting signs of its different lines of evidence, such as its biomechanical modelling, external morphology, and bone histology. So it seemed to have lived in lowland habitats in and around ponds, streams, and rivers, and the arrangement of shape of their teeth suggests they probably ate mostly large fish and aquatic tetrapods. The torso of Eriops was relatively stiff and the tail was stout, which made them poor swimmers. And while they probably fed on fish, these guys would have spent most of their time on land. And like other large primitive temnospondyls, these guys would actually grow slowly and gradually from aquatic larvae, but they did not go through a major metamorphosis like many modern amphibians. While adults probably lived in ponds and rivers, perhaps venturing on the backs, juveniles may have lived in swamps, which have offered more shelter from predators. That's very, very cool too. So, very, very cool little guy. Let you run off and do your thing. And next up, we have got Kank by Hawkowl1215. This is another new one that's been described. Have a look at you, little buddy. Quite nice standing there. So this is Kank australis. So Kank australis was an extinct genus and species of unilaging para-avian dinosaur. So urinlaging, so related things like Ostroraptor and stuff like that. From the late Cretaceous of the Chirilo Formation of southwestern Patagonia in Argentina. Contains a single species, Kank australis, which is known from fragmentary remains. So this species is mentioned at the Chirilo Formation. That my name may sound familiar to you, as we'll talk about what it lived with. Very interesting. So it's found in southwestern Patagonia. It consists of a single vertebrae, 3 pedal phalanges, and 5 teeth that were found in the same spot. Several additional remains of this population may belong to Kank, including a dorsal and vertebral centrum that was originally belonging to a Megaraptoran, a peduncle, ungual, and isolated teeth. The discovery of Kank itself makes it the first member of the family Unilagidae, which has been found in the Chirilo Formation, and it is notable for uncovering the gap between members from the northwest kind of members like Patagonia, such as Ostroraptor from the Allen Formation, and then the possible unilaging Invertebrata and Parabeta from the Snow Hill Formation in Antarctica. So the name Kank refers to the Elder Rhea, who in Enochic mythology created the celestial canals or the Southern Cross, and Australis refers to from the south. So very simple naming. So these guys were medium-sized unilagine with bodies similar in size to Nequidoraptor and it estimated about 27 kilograms, about 60 pounds. The teeth of these guys were small, curved apically, and lacked serrations. The maxillary teeth were straight and do not have a lingual curvature. They also bear asymptotically oriented flutes surrounding lateral grooves that had no serrated carinae. And the dentary teeth have been the mesocarpal restricted to third grade as seen in Ostroraptor, and similar to Buetoraptor, the maxillary teeth are labiolingically compressed when seen in cross-section when you cut them apart. The Chirilo Formation itself, of which Kank came from, it's not too different from other unilagines, but it's found from a predominantly wetland environment, which makes sense that they think they were fish eaters. With both terrestrial and freshwater conditions, with lots of fish. But other dinosaurs found in this formation include the Megaraptor Maip, Titanosaur Nelotitan, the Elasmarin or Hadrosaur Isasocursor, and intermediate fossils of Parankylosaur and Noasaurids. So things that are very similar to Stegoros and stuff like that. Other fossils include the crocodilomorph Costenoceratops, and also mammals such as the monotreme Patagorhynchus, which is a relative of the modern platypus, and the Therian Patagonomya, which was the largest Mesozoic mammal known. So yeah, very interesting guy. So let these guys run off and do their thing, because I know these little guys might need some time. But anyway, we're going to have a look at our next one. So we're back to the Netraptor mods. This one here, we have got Alioramus. Because I've already covered these two, I'm going to be quite brief with these guys. So let's have a look at these guys here. This is Alioramus. So this is Alioramus, which means different branch. So let's see if we can find one. Oh, you look quite pretty standing there. We got to pick you. So this is the different branch. These guys are a genus of Tyrannosaurid theropod from the late Cretaceous of Asia. It currently contains 2 species. The type species which is Remotus, which is known from a partial skull and 3-foot bones from the Nemex Formation. And then these were named by Soviet paleontologist Sergei Kurskov in 1976. A second species, Etali, which is known from much more complete specimens, was found in the Nemex Formation and was described by Stefan L. Russetti in 2009. In relationship to other Tyrannosaurus genera, it was first unclear, but some evidence suggesting that they were closely related to, Tarbosaurus. However, the discovery of Quinchosaurus, which is already in the game, indicates that they may be a distinct branch of Tyrannosaurs in the tribe Aliorami. So history discovery, as I mentioned, the holotype itself, partial skull, was found in the 1970s and then described in 1976. The generic name, Alioramus, was derived from Altus or other ramus branch, and Remotus, which means removed in Latin. So Remotus is, the first one there. And then, however, there are several faunal differences between Atali, which is the second specimen, and they're different age, so it's likely they could have been different species. And the name Atali refers to the Atali Mountains where they're found. So Alioramus was estimated to be about 5 or 6 meters long, or 16 to 20 feet, with more similar lengths, putting them at about 5.5 meters, and about, at most, about 500 kilograms or 700 kilograms. However, they did not correct for the lengthening of deformation, which means they may have a shorter body. And remember, all these specimens are juveniles, because there's no confirmed adult specimen of Alioramus known. They could have been greater lengths. So the skull of a Remotus was approximately about 45 centimeters, or 1.48 feet long. In general, it's long and low, shaped more similar to basal Tyrannosaurids and the juveniles of later Tyrannosaurids, or I'd say more like Nanotyrannus. The premaxillary bone at the tip of the snout in Alioramus remotus may have been found, but is taller and then wide than the Tyrannosaurus are mostly known. So a very interesting looking animal. Postcranial skeleton not known for very much, basically some other motherfoots and stuff, but Alatani is more complete. Has shed light on the anatomy. It was long classified within the subfamily Tyrannosauria, because we just didn't know where it fit. But more recent cladistics based on more complete specimens and stuff like that, and also the discovery of Quinchosaurus in 2014, which is a very close relative, and actually an adult too. So that one's known from adult. These guys would have belonged in the Tyrannosaur family Aliorami, so that's kind of on its way. It's split off, and then you have things like Tetraphonius, Daspletosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus and Tarbosaurus going off doing their own thing. So these guys were the lean and mean guys, and then they went off and became big and destructive. So these guys lacked a lot of those traits, unlike most other, Tyrannosaurs, big and bulky, like Tyrannosaurus itself. These guys would have been a lot more smaller, a lot more leaner and meaner, mainly focusing on smaller prey, and likely because they lived in the same habitat. So these guys would have lived with Tarbosaurus. That's how they avoided competing with each other. If the Tarbosaurus is the lion, these guys are the leopard. And that's probably the best way to describe it. So these guys would have been slim and gracile, hunting smaller, nimble prey, while the larger Tyrannosaurids, like Tarbosaurus, would have been eating the large hadrosaurs and sauropods of the environment, which makes sense. There has been also historical analysis looking at the ontogeny, suggests that they correlated that these guys were a 9-year-old and actively going Tyrannosaur of Altani. The team, however, noted that body size individual was closer to a 7 to 8-year-old Albertosaurus and a 5 or 6-year-old Daspletosaurus and Tyrannosaurus. These guys may have had quite a bit smaller adult sizes. So they were not thinking they got as big as Tarbosaurus or Tyrannosaurus, but likely would have still gotten bigger than that. Bigger than this one. So, which was suggested that Alioramus attained a Cranosaurus. Later, they argued the skull shape and cranial ornamentation of Alioramus being juvenile traits. Smaller, mostly than longer snout than any known juvenile of Tyrannosaurus, which had several documented ontogenetic growth series at the time. So they may have been. This suggests that adults may have actually had quite elaborate skulls, which is very interesting. Though examinations of Quinchosaurus and comparisons of Alioramus, both Alioramus species in 2022, suggested that both Alioramus species are known from juvenile specimens in juvenile growth states, or young growth states, different growing states. But Quinchosaurus is an adult. So the examinations also suggest that variation seen in these various species is consistent with the growth in other tyrannosaurids. Those specimens that could constitute a full growth from series to infant of each species not been recovered for these tyrannosaurs. One path of growth series seems all, were discovered relatively unique, so they seem to grow a bit different from other ones. And the same study also suggests that Aleorhamens did not go the metamorphosis from robust to, slender juveniles to robust adults that was suggested at the time for Tarbosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, which we know is not a thing because Nenotyrannus is definitely valid. So yeah, very, very interesting anyway. In terms of its paleo environment, they are considered to be the same age in the Namek formation, with it being so the beds been Namek. The geologic formation has never been dated radiometrically, but it's always thought to be Maastrichtian age, end of the Cretaceous. The formations these guys are found in would have likely been the Dijota Formation and Paragot Formation. However, Namek, these guys have been warmer and more humid compared to those formations. So the Namek was very much, wet and humid and lots of large animals living around, as we went through with Saurolophus. So these guys would live with Therizinosaurs, Ornithomimosaurs, Tarbosaurus, Troodontids, Pachycephalosaurs and Chylosaurs and Hadrosaurs, and those Titanosaurs I was telling you about. So very similar formation, lived with those guys. We lived with Duonicus and Saurolophus, well, mostly Saurolophus. Yeah, not too much out of the ordinary. Alright, but last but certainly not least, we have got Nanucosaurus. Let's have a look at these guys. Who was actually featured quite prominently on Surviving Earth, by the way. So we'll have a look at the cute, cool coloured one. Let's see what one we can have a look at. And, of course, it does that. I wish that would just stop already. That's quite... Oh, you look quite nice. I might just let you walk around a little bit and go look into the light. Now you're a good one. Just a little bit too blue. But yeah, that's alright. Very, very cool. Nice to see you, Tyrannus, getting some love, with all the modders. Love seeing feathers. Absolutely love seeing all these feathers. So this is the Nanucosaurus, which means the polar bear lizard. So these guys are a genus of Tyrannosaurine theropod from the late Cretaceous, late Campanian, Prince Creek Formation, and potentially Maastrichtian of North Slope of Alaska. It contains one single species, Nanucosaurus hoggoldi, which is known from a partial skull and multiple undescribed postcranial and teeth elements. So when it was first discovered, it was thought to refer to the genus Gorgosaurus, and then was split, because it was younger than thought, and then put in Albertosaurus. However, though, in 2006, within the North Slope borough of Alaska, fossilized remains of the medium-sized theropod were found. The material contained multiple fragments of the animal's skull, all of which were collected from the same quarry, and found most likely belonged to a single individual. Among these disarticulated fragments, there was, bits of the skull, as well, and they estimate the skull length at about 600 to 700 millimeters, which is, and they also suggest it was late Campanian age. It wasn't until they prepared the specimens, where the Alaskan Tyrannosaurid remains were, finally recognized a new taxon, and they were named Nanucosaurus by Anthony R. Ferrillo and Ronald S. Tulowski in 2014, and they were referred to as the holotype. And Nanucosaurus means, as we kind of mentioned, the Inuit word for polar bear, and then lizard, so it's polar bear lizard. And the specific name honors the philanthropist Forrest Holgood, who worked in philanthropy and many cultural, and cultural institutions. So the history of this guy is actually quite interesting as well. So initially, Nanucosaurus was actually thought to be very small and was considered like a dwarf tyrannosaur. So Nanucosaurus is estimated to be about 5 or 6 meters long, or about 16 to 20 feet, a metric based on the holotype, which put it about half the length of Tyrannosaurus. The length of the same specimen's reconstructed skull, about 70 centimeters long, and it would have weighed between 500 to 900 kilograms, or just about 2,000 pounds at most. The Sheminidosaur was postulated to be an adaptation for high latitude habitats. However, later sites tied 13 additional fossils to this single taxon, and more recent work suggests these guys were actually quite a bit bigger. And their small size was unfounded, and they were actually quite similar to Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus in size, and they grew up to about 8 to 9 meters long, or about 26 to 30 feet. based on undescribed adult-sized teeth and postcranial elements. And some of the undescribed post elements even scale to about 7 meters in length, which is comparable to juvenile Tarbosaurus, and that means that these guys would have likely weighed about, just under 2 tons in weight. And it would likely have resembled other large tyrannosaurines, such as the Spinosaurus, as they would have been closely related to them, and would have served a similar role in their environment. So where these guys fit on the dinosaur family tree, there are in Tyrannosaurini. They split before they come after Alliarami, but they split just before Dasplitosaurini, which includes, Daspletosaurus and Tarbosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, and Zuchingtyrannus as well. But a 2023 analysis and 2024 study that recovered Aegyptyrannus in there as well. So the Dinosaurus is still considered to be a close relative of Daspletosaurus and Tarbosaurus and Tyrannosaurus and them. So very interesting. So in terms of paleobiology, they kind of were looking at them and thinking, because dinosaurs were originally always imagined to be very much living in warm climates, but these guys would have still been living in, higher latitudes. So its analysis of material attributed to Dinosaurus found the same environment as a result of the Prince Queen Formation had a high percentage of development of young dinosaurs compared to the amount of families represented. So material from young dinosaur specimens had been determined to be present from several major clades, and 70% of them recognised the families in the quarry. That included, Hadrosaurids, Thescelosaurids, Leptosauridae, Ceratopsinae, Tyrannosauridae, Dromaeosauridae, Turodontidae, and Aviale. This suggests that Dinosaurus and likely prey items would have remained in the Paleoarctic year-round and would have to cope with about 120 days of constant darkness a year in the winter, as opposed to resorting to migration to escape these harsh conditions. It is also proposed that these dinosaurs would have likely laid eggs towards the beginning of the constant daylight period around the month of April, which allows the time to incubate at the heat of this part of the year. So that's when they would have laid their eggs. So that's very interesting. In terms of its paleoecology, they lived alongside many other dinosaurs that have been referred to as the Amtronian follow stage of the latest Carpanian, and the largest carnivore in the area would have likely been an apex predator, having resided at an estimated 18 to 85 at paleolatitude. Isotope analysis suggests that these guys would have lived in annual temperatures of just above freezing. So still would have been not quite as cold as it gets today, but still very cold, especially for people when we think of tropical dinosaurs. Other dinosaurs it would have lived with is an unnamed Leptoceratopsid, so a very small ceratopsid, Edmontosaurus, something like that, Hadrosaurus, an unnamed Lambeosaurine, an unnamed Thestosaurine, similar to Parkosaurus or Thescelosaurus, something similar to Orodromius as well, Pachyrhinosaurus, Elascocephalae, Troodon, Dromaeosaurus, and Ornitholestes, which are all dromaeosaurs and troodontines and stuff like that. An unnamed Ornithomimosaur, an unnamed Ornitholestine, and also multiple birds as well. As well as these guys that would have lived with mammals, such as the Megatherium Elanoxus and the Etherium Genostopsis, also some multituberculates, and actually a marsupial too. So due to the cooler conditions, many other common endothermic clades, like reptiles and crocodiles and stuff, are not well represented, suggesting these animals were endotherms to some degree. So because of the cooler temperatures, these guys were basically all had to be somewhat endotherms and generate their own body heat because there was no heat found in the environment. So, that suggests that, that's potentially where mammals got to go a bit more of a leg up as well. So, yeah, very, very cool, if I do say myself. Really nice Dinosaurus, another net raptor win. So I think this will be a great place to end the video. So, yeah, I'm going to thank everyone. Thank you, Net Raptor, for your Achlorosaurus, your Carpanian, your and also for the Alliaramus and Dinosaurus. And I want to thank you, Hockow1215, for your Duonicus, both species of Saurolophus, Europs, and Kank. You did a really great job with that. So, yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always click the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.